Chapter 9 of Alice Adams. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Jeanie. Alice Adams by Booth Tarkington. Chapter 9. On a morning a week after this collapse of festal hopes, Mrs. Adams and her daughter were concluding a 3 days' disturbance, the spring house-cleaning, postponed until now by Adams's long illness. And Alice, on her knees before a chest of drawers in her mother's room, paused thoughtfully after dusting a packet of letters wrapped in worn muslin. She called to her mother, who was scrubbing the floor of the hallway just beyond the open door. "These old letters you had in the bottom drawer, weren't they some papa wrote you before you were married?" Mrs. Adams laughed and said, "Yes, just put 'em back where they were, or else up in the attic, anywhere you want to." "Do you mind if I read one, Mama?" Mrs. Adams laughed again. "Oh, I guess you can if you want to. I expect they're pretty funny." Alice laughed in response and chose the topmost letter of the packet. "My dear, beautiful girl," it began. And she stared at these singular words. They gave her a shock like that caused by overhearing some bewildering impropriety. And having read them over to herself several times, she went on to experience other shocks. "My dear, beautiful girl, this time yesterday I had a mighty bad case of blues because I had not had a word from you in 2 whole long days, and when I do not hear from you every day, things look mighty down in the mouth to me. Now it is all so different because your letter has arrived, and besides I have got a piece of news I believe you will think as fine as I do. Darling, you will be surprised, so get ready to hear about a big effect on our future. It is this way. I had sort of a suspicion the head of the firm kind of took a fancy to me from the first when I went in there, and liked the way I attended to my work, and so when he took me on this business trip with him I felt pretty sure of it, and now turns out I was about right. In return, I guess I have got about the best boss in this world, and I believe you will think so too. Yes, sweetheart, after the talk I have just had with him, if J. A. Lamb asked me to cut my hand off for him I guess I would come pretty near doing it, because what he says means the end of our waiting to be together. From New Year's on he is going to put me in entire charge of the sundries department, and what do you think is going to be my salary? 1,100 cool dollars a year, $1,100, that's all. Just only a cool 1,100 per annum. Well, I guess that will show your mother whether I can take care of you or not, and oh, how I would like to see your dear, beautiful, loving face when you get this news. I would like to go out on the public streets and just dance and shout, and it is all I can do to help doing it, especially when I know we will be talking it all over together this time next week, and oh, my darling, now that your folks have no excuse for putting it off any longer, we might be in our own little home before Christmas. Would you be glad? Well, darling, this settles everything and makes our future just about as smooth for us as anybody could ask. I can hardly realize after all this waiting life's troubles are over for you and me, and we have nothing to do but to enjoy the happiness granted us by this wonderful, beautiful thing we call life. I know I am not any poet, and the one I tried to write about you the day of the picnic was fearful, but the way I think about you is a poem. Write me what you think of the news. I know, but write me anyhow. I'll get it before we start home, and I can be reading it over all the time on the tram. Your always loving Virgil. The sound of her mother's diligent scrubbing in the hall came back slowly to Alice's hearing as she restored the letter to the packet, wrapped the packet in its muslin covering, and returned it to the drawer. She had remained upon her knees while she read the letter. Now she sank backward, sitting upon the floor with her hands behind her, an unconscious relaxing for better ease to think. Upon her face there had fallen a look of wonder. For the first time she was vaguely perceiving that life is everlasting movement. Youth really believes what is running water to be a permanent crystallization, and sees time fixed to a point. Some people have dark hair, some people have blond hair, some people have gray hair. Until this moment Alice had no conviction that there was a universe before she came into it. She had always thought of it as the background of herself. The moon was something to make her prettier on a summer night. But this old letter, through which she saw still flickering an ancient starlight of young love, astounded her. Faintly before her it revealed the whole lives of her father and mother, who had been young, after all, they really had. and their youth was now so utterly passed from them that the picture of it in the letter was like a burlesque of them. And so she herself must pass to such stages too, and all that now seemed vital to her would be nothing. When her work was finished that afternoon, she went into her father's room. His recovery had progressed well enough to permit the departure of Miss Perry, and Adams, wearing one of Mrs. Adams's wrappers over his nightgown, sat in a high-backed chair by a closed window. The weather was warm, but the closed window and the flannel wrapper had not sufficed him. Round his shoulders he had an old crocheted scarf of Alice's. His legs were wrapped in a heavy comforter, and, with these swathings about him and his eyes closed, his thin and grizzled head making but a slight indentation in the pillow supporting it, he looked old and little and queer. Alice would have gone out softly, but without opening his eyes he spoke to her. "Don't go, dearie. Come sit with the old man a little while." She brought a chair near his. "I thought you were napping." "No, I don't hardly ever do that. I just drift a little sometimes." "How do you mean you drift, Papa?" He looked at her vaguely. "Oh, I don't know. Kind of pictures. They get a little mixed up. Old times with times still ahead. Like planning what to do, you know. That's as near a nap as I get, when the pictures mix up some. I suppose it's sort of drowsing." She took one of his hands and stroked it. "What do you mean when you say you have pictures like planning what to do?" she asked. "I mean planning what to do when I get out and able to go to work again." "But that doesn't need any planning," Alice said quickly. "You're going back to your old place at Lamb's, of course." Adams closed his eyes again, sighing heavily, but made no other response. "Why, of course you are!" she cried. "What are you talking about?" His head turned slowly toward her, revealing the eyes, open in a haggard stare. "I heard you the other night when you came from the party," he said. "I know what was the matter." "Indeed you don't," she assured him. "You don't know anything about it, because there wasn't anything the matter at all." "Don't you suppose I heard you crying? What did you cry for if there wasn't anything the matter?" "Just nerves, Papa. It wasn't anything else in the world." "Never mind," he said. "Your mother told me." "She promised me not to." At that Adams laughed mournfully. "It wouldn't be very likely I'd hear you so upset and not ask about it, even if she didn't come and tell me on her own hook. You needn't try to fool me. I tell you I know what was the matter." "The only matter was that I had a silly fit," Alice protested. "It did me good, too." "How's that?" "Because I've decided to do something about it, Papa." "That isn't the way your mother looks at it," Adams said ruefully. "She thinks it's our place to do something about it. Well, I don't know. I don't know. Everything seems so changed these days. You've always been a good daughter, Alice, and you ought to have as much as any of these girls you go with. She's convinced me she's right about that. The trouble is—" He faltered apologetically, then went on. "I mean, the question is, how to get it for you." "No!" she cried. "I had no business to make such a fuss just because a lot of idiots didn't break their necks to get dances with me, and because I got mortified about Walter. Walter was pretty horrible." "Oh, me, my!" Adams lamented. "I guess that's something we just have to leave work out itself. What you going to do with a boy 19 or 20 years old that makes his own living? Can't whip him. Can't keep him locked up in the house. Just got to hope he'll learn better, I suppose." "Of course he didn't want to go to the Palmers'," Alice explained tolerantly. "And as Mama and I made him take me, he thought that was pretty selfish in me. Why, he felt he had a right to amuse himself any way he could. Of course it was awful that this Mr. Russell should—" In spite of herself, the recollection choked her. "Yes, it was awful," Adams agreed. "Just awful. Oh, me, my!" But Alice recovered herself at once and showed him a cheerful face. "Well, just a few years from now I probably won't even remember it. I believe hardly anything amounts to as much as we think it does at the time." "Well, sometimes it don't." "What I've been thinking, Papa, it seems to me I ought to do something." "What like?" She looked dreamy, but was obviously serious as she told him, "Well, I mean, I ought to be something besides just a kind of nobody. I ought to—" She paused. "What, dearie?" "Well, there's one thing I'd like to do. I'm sure I could do it, too." "What?" "I want to go on the stage. I know I could act." At this her father abruptly gave utterance to a feeble cackling of laughter, and when Alice, surprised and a little offended, pressed him for his reason, he